I'll be reading from the May 21st, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: Fed officials at their meeting last month all but retired the question of whether to cut interest rates and began seriously to weigh whether to raise them, minutes show. Major U.S. stock indexes surged, with the S&P 500, NASDAQ, and Dow Industrials advancing 1.1%, 1.5%, and 1.3% respectively. Anthropic's revenue is set to more than double to $10.9 billion in the second quarter, an explosive rate of growth that will help it turn an operating profit for the first time. SpaceX filed for an initial public offering, disclosing fresh information on its business and ownership, as investors prepare for what could be the largest flotation on record. NVIDIA reported record sales and earnings, driven by surging demand for data center computing and the astronomical rise of artificial intelligence agents. ChatGPT maker OpenAI has been working with bankers to prepare to file for an initial public offering in the coming days or weeks. BlackRock shareholders signaled they aren't thrilled with the big pay raises that Chief Executive Larry Fink and his top lieutenants received for last year. Samsung's management and union leaders reached a tentative bonus pay agreement, averting a strike at the world's largest memory chip maker. Media investor James Murdoch agreed to buy Vox Media's New York Magazine, the Vox News site, and the Vox Media podcast network. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. The Trump administration secured an indictment against former Cuban President Raul Castro as it seeks to wring economic and political concessions from the country's communist regime. Trump's retribution campaign is fracturing support for his priorities in the Senate, where anger is mounting among Republicans facing what is expected to be a difficult midterm election for their party. Two police officers who defended the Capitol during the January 6th attack filed a lawsuit to stop the administration's plan to create a fund for payouts to purported victims of weaponization and lawfare. EU negotiators said they reached a provisional deal to remove some tariffs on U.S. imports ahead of a deadline, after which Trump vowed to increase tariffs on cars from the bloc. The UK delayed some new sanctions on Russian oil in a bid to shelter Britons from a cost of living squeeze arising from the impasse at the Strait of Hormuz. Putin traveled to Beijing looking for support for Russia's economy and to demonstrate his close ties with China. A new executive order from Trump would lean on banks to collect more information about their customers' immigration status. Faculty at Harvard University voted to approve a cap on the number of A's per course as part of a long push to curb grade inflation. Died Barney Frank, 86, former longtime Massachusetts congressman. The headline in today's paper: Ebola fears swell in Congo as virus spreads. And the picture shows 4 hazmat dressed people carrying a coffin. And that caption reads, "Deadly toll." Red Cross workers carry the coffin of a person who died of Ebola at a health center in Wampara, Congo, on Wednesday. Fears over the virus forced Congo's soccer team to cancel its training camp in advance of the World Cup. The article: Ebola scraps camp by soccer squad. The Democratic Republic of Congo's soccer team has canceled a 3-day World Cup preparation training camp and a planned farewell to fans in the capital, Kinshasa, because of an outbreak of the Ebola virus in the east of the country. Preparations will take place elsewhere after an outbreak of a rare type of Ebola known as Bundibugyo, which is thought to have killed more than 130 people and caused nearly 600 suspected cases. The World Health Organization has declared it a public health emergency of international concern. Congo is scheduled to play World Cup warm-up games against Denmark in Liège, Belgium on June 3rd and Chile in southern Spain on June 9th. Both matches are going ahead as planned, team spokesman Jerry Kalimo said on Wednesday. Other articles from the front page follow. SpaceX puts its IPO in motion. SEC filing starts move to raise tens of billions of dollars in blockbuster debut by Micah Maidenberg and Corey Driebush. SpaceX filed Wednesday for its long-anticipated initial public offering, disclosing fresh information on its businesses and ownership as investors prepare for what could be the largest IPO on record. The rocket maker run by Elon Musk is looking to raise $80 billion or more, which would easily make it the largest IPO in history, eclipsing the offering by Saudi Aramco that raised $26 billion when it went public in 2019. SpaceX revealed new details about its financials and how Musk will try to grow a sprawling enterprise dedicated to advancing cutting-edge technologies in space and back on Earth. The company disclosed the information in an investor prospectus posted to the Securities and Exchange Commission's website. Musk has touted out-of-this-world objectives for the company, from deploying a huge number of artificial intelligence satellites in the future to colonizing Mars. Texas-based SpaceX has distinct businesses ranging from rocket launch and satellite operations to a nascent AI unit that is racing to catch up with rivals. Founded by Musk in 2002, SpaceX revolutionized the commercial space industry. The company has grown from a startup with a handful of employees that almost went out of business to one of the world's most valuable private companies with more than 22,000 workers as of March 31st. It controls technologies that competitors and even nation states haven't been able to fully match. SpaceX reported its revenue last year at $18.67 billion, up 33% from the prior year. However, it swung to a net loss of $4.94 billion, driven by a sharp increase in cost, including those for research and development. In 2024, the company said its profit was $791 million. SpaceX successfully developed a fleet of partially reusable Falcon 9 rockets that allowed it to dominate the global launch market. The company's Starlink satellite internet business has grown quickly in recent years and boasts the largest satellite fleet in history. Earlier this year, Musk transformed SpaceX by folding his xAI startup into the company and recasting a big part of the combined enterprise's future around developing data centers in orbit to handle computing needed for artificial intelligence. You want to wake up in the morning and think the future is going to be great. And that's what being a spacefaring civilization is all about, Musk said in the filing. It's about believing in the future and thinking that the future will be better than the past. SpaceX is now tracking to begin selling shares in mid-June. It said Goldman Sachs is leading the offering, along with Morgan Stanley, with Bank of America, Citigroup, and JP Morgan. Anthropic revenue surges, set to post first profit. Sales seen reaching $10.9 billion in second quarter, up 130% over the previous quarter. By Berber Jin. Anthropic's revenue is set to more than double to $10.9 billion in the second quarter, an explosive rate of growth that will help it turn an operating profit for the first time. The company disclosed the figures to investors as part of a continuing funding round that is likely to push its valuation above OpenAI's. The projections provide a window into the meteoric rise of a startup that was once a laggard in the AI race and defy the conventional wisdom that AI companies' huge spending needs hamper near-term profitability. Anthropic generated $4.8 billion in sales in the first quarter. Its quarterly revenue is now growing faster than Zoom did during the pandemic and Google and Facebook in the run-up to their IPOs. It is set to turn an operating profit of $559 million in the June quarter. Anthropic shared financial figures with investors last summer that suggested the company didn't expect to turn a full-year profit until at least 2028. The company might not remain profitable for the full year as it plans spending increases due to its vast computing needs. Its operating profit includes the cost to train new models and excludes stock-based compensation. Anthropic sales have exploded since the start of the year as enterprises across the world race to adopt its set of coding tools. Anthropic, OpenAI, and SpaceX are racing toward public listings that might value each of the three companies at more than $1 trillion, a testament to the expectations investors have for AI to revamp industries and markets. OpenAI might file paperwork as soon as Friday indicating its plans an initial public offering, and SpaceX is expected to IPO as soon as June, the Wall Street Journal has reported. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trump primary wins spark GOP backlash. By Lindsay Wise, Ken Thomas, and Marianne Levine. Washington. President Trump's retribution campaign is fracturing support for his priorities in the Senate, where anger is mounting among fellow Republicans over his latest moves to punish GOP critics and reward allies headed into what is expected to be a difficult midterm election for their party. The growing frustration with Trump could endanger Republicans' legislative agenda, which relies primarily on their ability to stick together on party line votes, from immigration enforcement funding to a gas tax holiday to tens of billions of dollars for the U.S. war in Iran. It could also weigh on their chances for holding on to the House and Senate. I think it goes back to the old "be careful what you wish for," quipped Senator Tom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, who is retiring after Trump made clear he wanted him gone. On votes, he said, "I think there will be fewer political calculations going into people's decision-making process." The split centers on Trump's efforts to oust sitting Republican members of Congress, topped off by his endorsement of a challenger to Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, on Tuesday that stunned many colleagues. In a clear sign of tensions, Senate Republicans said Wednesday that they don't have the votes to preserve $1 billion in funding tied to Trump's planned White House ballroom, part of a critical package funding immigration enforcement. Republicans, who have a 53-47 edge in the Senate, are aiming to pass $70 billion in multi-year funding for immigration and customs enforcement and border patrol by the end of the month. "I'm told the votes are not there," said Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana. Asked whether Trump has antagonized some Republican senators with his aggressive efforts to oust them or their colleagues in primaries, Kennedy said, "A fair-minded person would say the circumstance you described sure isn't making it easier." Some Republicans have balked at the idea of using taxpayer dollars for anything tied to Trump's ballroom project at a time when many people are grappling with high prices for gasoline and other daily essentials, several months into the Iran war. A number of GOP lawmakers have also raised concerns about Trump's recent deal to create a government fund that could benefit allies and end audits of his taxes. The fights show the risk of Trump's payback campaign. While the president has made clear he can make or break the career of any Republican, he is also creating a class of vanquished lawmakers still in office. Republicans and aides on Capitol Hill have begun referring to a new YOLO caucus, "You only live once," of outgoing senators who have little left to lose in bucking Trump. U.S. charges Castro over downed planes, by Zadie Gurman, Deborah Acosta, and Vera Bergengruen. Miami. The Trump administration has secured an indictment against Raul Castro, Cuba's aging patriarch and former president, escalating its pressure campaign as it seeks to force economic and political concessions from the country's communist regime. Prosecutors charged Castro with murder, conspiracy to kill U.S. nationals, and destruction of aircraft, according to court documents, dealing a blow to a leader of the Cuban Revolution who remains the country's most powerful figure despite his retirement from public life. The charges relate to the Cuban military shooting down of civilian planes flown by the humanitarian group Brothers to the Rescue in 1996 when Castro was serving as defense minister. 3 U.S. citizens and 1 permanent resident, all part of the Cuban exile community, were killed. The United States government has not forgotten these innocent men who were shot out of the sky, said Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, who announced the indictment at Miami's Freedom Tower in front of members of the local Cuban American community, including the mother and father of one of the victims. President Miguel Diaz-Canel of Cuba wrote on social media on Wednesday, "This is a political maneuver devoid of any legal foundation, aimed solely at padding the fabricated dossier they use to justify the folly of a military aggression against Cuba." The indictment, which court records show was returned by a grand jury in Florida in April, marks a sharp escalation of the administration's efforts to pressure the Cuban government to make changes as the impoverished island struggles to keep lights on amid a U.S.-imposed oil blockade. It names a handful of other defendants who were Cuban Air Force pilots. Toxic U.S. divide reaches jury rooms. Rigid viewpoints and political divisions make juror battles more common. By Corinne Rami. Dissensions in jury rooms is as old as the U.S. jury system. Trial lawyers and consultants who size up potential jurors, though, say the kinds of pitched battles that eventually erupted in a Florida jury room are becoming more common. They blame a post-pandemic erosion of trust in the justice system, more rigid viewpoints, and starker political divides, which they say have made it harder for 12 strangers to even get along, much less agree on whether to send someone to prison or order companies to pay millions of dollars in damages. Whatever you see in society at large, you see in the jury deliberation room, said jury consultant Lori Kolansky. The isolation of COVID, the political divide, are making us more and more disabled as a society to agree and then reach consensus and compromise. The Knicks' miracle comeback stuns the Cavaliers in Game 1. New York trailed Cleveland by 22 points in the fourth quarter. That's when Jalen Brunson led the wildest run in franchise history to secure a momentum-shifting victory in overtime. By Robert O'Connell. For 27 years, the Knicks have known nothing but terrible luck. In their quest to reach the NBA Finals for the first time this century, they've suffered seasons so miserable they were eliminated from playoffs with weeks to spare. They've lost in the postseason in every way imaginable, from blowouts in the first round to heartbreak in the conference finals. Tuesday night in Madison Square Garden, that run of misfortune seemed certain to continue. The Knicks trailed Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals by 22 points in the fourth quarter against the Cleveland Cavaliers, and then they produced the unthinkable. The NBA's most snake-bit franchise pulled off the most miraculous comeback of the playoffs, roaring back to win in overtime, 115-104. The Knicks pulled it off with a furious 44-11 run that saw them score 30 of those points in the final 7 minutes 39 seconds of regulation. All told, New York didn't hold the lead for a single second of the third or fourth quarters. "We don't want to give up," said Knicks superstar point guard Jalen Brunson. Ever. January 6 officers sue to stop the $1.8 billion fund for payouts. By C. Ryan Barber. 2 police officers who defended the Capitol during the January 6, 2021 attack filed a lawsuit on Wednesday seeking to stop the Trump administration's plan to create a nearly $1.8 billion fund for payouts to purported victims of weaponization and lawfare. Their law firm, former Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn and Metropolitan Police Officer Daniel Hodges, challenged the constitutionality of the compensation plan, calling it a slush fund to finance the insurrectionist and paramilitary groups that commit violence in President Trump's name. Dunn and Hodges did not back down on January 6. Instead, they held the line to defend democracy and the rule of law. They bring this case to do so once again, wrote their legal team at the Public Integrity Project, an anti-corruption group led by a former federal prosecutor involved in the wave of cases stemming from the Capitol attack. From World Watch, United Kingdom. Sanctions eased on Russian oil. The UK government has delayed some new sanctions on Russian oil in a bid to shelter Britons from the cost of living squeeze triggered by the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz in the Iran war. A trade license that took effect on Wednesday permits the import of Russian oil that has been refined into jet fuel and diesel in third countries such as India and Turkey. The UK in October said it would ban imports of those products. Opposition Conservative Party leader Kemi Badenoch accused the government of choosing to buy dirty Russian oil. But Prime Minister Keir Starmer said the government is phasing in the sanctions package announced in October and has issued a targeted short-term license for the refined products to protect British consumers in a volatile situation. Banks ordered to check immigration status by Dylan Tokar. A new executive order from President Trump would push banks to collect more information about their customers' immigration status, part of an administration effort to crack down on undocumented immigrants' access to the U.S. banking system. Trump on Tuesday ordered regulators to rethink Know Your Customer rules meant to guard against money laundering and terrorist financing. The executive order would make a person's immigration status an explicit part of a bank's assessment of whether a customer poses a money laundering risk. The executive order doesn't go as far as an earlier proposal previously reported by the Wall Street Journal in February, which would have required banks to collect a new category of documents, such as passports, from both new and existing customers. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, Trump reaches an Iran crossroads. He wants the war to end, but the regime offers him only bad deals. Back from his China trip, President Trump faces hard decisions on the war with Iran. To wit, if Iran keeps stringing his diplomats along in negotiations, what is he prepared to do to win the war? Nearly 3 months into the conflict, the answer isn't obvious. While the U.S. has done enormous damage to Iran's military and set back its nuclear program, the regime refuses his offers for a settlement and has shut down most commercial traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. To his credit, the president has so far rejected a bad deal on Iran's terms that might open the strait at the price of easing pressure on the regime without real nuclear concessions. Mr. Trump seems to realize this would be Obama 2015 redux that the world would see as a strategic defeat for the U.S. Yet, Mr. Trump's ceasefire has now exceeded the length of Operation Epic Fury, even as Iran reneged on reopening the strait and fires on the Gulf states and U.S. forces. While a subsequent U.S. blockade on shipping to and from Iranian ports has meant Iran suffers most, the regime's new leaders have been safe while they hold global energy supply hostage. If the goal was to see whether Iran's regime is ready to abandon its pursuit of nuclear weapons, by now, Mr. Trump has his answer. It isn't. The Iranians confirm this with each counteroffer that refuses to dismantle underground enrichment sites or hand over their stockpiles of enriched uranium. There's no question in my mind that they'd use a nuclear bomb, Mr. Trump said Tuesday, and I deal with these people. They're extremely radicalized. Yet on Monday, he gave them another chance. The president said he was an hour away from relaunching the war until he got a call. Sir, could you wait? We think we are close to a deal. Given Iran's past refusals, Mr. Trump added, I hope we don't have to go do the war, but we may have to give them another big hit. He said he would wait 2 or 3 days, maybe Friday, Saturday, Sunday, something. Maybe early next week, a limited period of time. Such threats have been repeated so often that they now face diminishing returns. Iran doesn't seem to believe them, and in any case, the regime seems prepared to ride out further conflict and fight back by targeting the Gulf allies and commercial shipping. If a good deal isn't possible, then Mr. Trump will have little choice other than to resume using military force. But to what end? Resuming the war needs to be tied to a strategic goal that can be achieved without the Iranian regime's agreement. One option is to seize Iran's enriched uranium and destroy its potential enrichment site beneath Pickaxe Mountain, or aid Israel in attempting it. The aim would be to further degrade Iran's nuclear threat, changing the contours of negotiations and revising what a deal would have to achieve. If the gravest nuclear threats can be taken off the table for many more years, the need for a deal with Iran declines. Another option is to continue the Iran blockade while putting together a naval and air mission to escort shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. This is militarily possible, and if the strait is reopened by force, time will be on America's side. Mr. Trump could then afford to wait, allowing the U.S. blockade to raise pressure on Iran as it is forced to shut in oil wells and ration gasoline. Mr. Trump could also destroy Iran's oil infrastructure in stages. He has avoided this so far, hoping the regime would see these assets as something to lose if it doesn't accept a deal. He also wants to avoid another blow to global oil supply. But escalating damage would leave the regime diminished and cash poor, unable even to pay salaries if it rejects U.S. terms. The president can still maintain the blockade while using the CIA to support dissidents inside Iran. All of this carries risks, both military and economic. But by now the president has no options that don't include risks. Signing a mooted letter of intent to continue negotiating for another 30 days, a ceasefire extension for Iran, in essence, would merely raise the cost while letting Iran string Mr. Trump along even closer to the election. U.S. deterrence against China in particular would suffer. As Mr. Trump famously said in criticizing his predecessors, the U.S. shouldn't start a war if it isn't prepared to do what it takes to win. From the opinion pages, U.S. defense needs more competition, not more money. The Pentagon doesn't have to rely on legacy suppliers. It can create alternatives that others can produce. By Peter Devine and Sam Slocum. America is burning through missiles and munitions much faster than the defense industry can replenish them. The Pentagon's response is to splash out money, multi-year procurement agreements, equity stakes, long-term supply deals to signal committed demand and unlock private investment. This year, RTX, formerly Raytheon Technologies, has locked in framework agreements valued at tens of billions of dollars covering advanced medium-range air-to-air missiles, Tomahawks, Patriot interceptors, and Standard missiles, the largest munitions commitment in recent program history. The intention is right, but the approach won't work. The constraint isn't insufficient capital or demand, it's a lack of competition. In 1990, there were 51 prime defense firms. Today, there are 5. 3, RTX, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman, control 90% of U.S. missile supply and don't compete with each other. In competitive markets, companies price at their cost of production, and greater demand increases output at stable prices. Monopolies are different. Because buyers have no alternative, monopolies set prices not based on the size of demand, but on the buyer's desperation. America needs missiles badly, but its sheer desperation won't hasten production. It makes the country more exploitable. Conventional wisdom in Washington holds that inconsistent demand has kept suppliers like RTX from investing in production capacity. The remedy is to throw them cheap financing, government investment, and multi-year procurement guarantees. But this belies the facts. RTX has seen demand surge from the Ukraine war, Asian deterrence, and the Middle East. Yet the company entered 2026 with a $75 billion missile backlog and has raised its 2026 guidance. Revenue is up 10%, while adjusted operating profit is up 25%. High profits and unnecessary scarcity are hallmarks of monopolies. Giving these firms bigger contracts makes them more profitable, not more productive. The Pentagon should create a more competitive market structure. It should design emergency variants, or E-models, of its most critical systems. The E-model should be easy to manufacture with government-owned intellectual property and be backed by engineers who can certify new producers, such as car companies, automotive suppliers, and pleasure craft fabricators that have never held a defense contract in months rather than years. Cutting the timeline for a new competitive entrant would generate more missiles than any financing package. E-models aren't as fine-tuned as their standard counterparts, but they don't need to replace Patriots, only to make RTX and Lockheed know they could. And if push comes to shove, hundreds of thousands of 90% solutions are preferable to perfection that never arrives. America created its World War II arsenal of democracy on exactly this logic, producing hardware such as disposable emergency vessels. Emergency cargo II Liberty ships weren't optimal. 19 broke in half without warning, but the design could be built up and down the coast by 18 different yards and deployed across the world. A more recent example comes courtesy of Iran. The U.S. captured and reverse-engineered an Iranian Shahed drone, naming the new weapon Lucas for low-cost, unscrewed, or unmanned combat attack system. Because the U.S. government pirated the intellectual property, it can license Lucas designs to any manufacturing facility in the country, making the Lucas the only cheap and scalable munition in the U.S. arsenal today. The Pentagon must go further and design and own these E-models on purpose rather than by accident. Not addressing our monopolized industry is the core error in our national approach. Multi-year procurement agreements have legitimate logic. Demand consistency lowers the cost of investment and lets companies amortize fixed cost. But a 7-year sole source agreement with no competitive alternative and no IP transfer milestones isn't merely a demand signal. It also guarantees that the supplier won't have to price competitively or produce on time. Government equity stakes compound the problem by giving incumbents a new argument against every reform, that harming the contracting company harms the taxpayer's investment. The solution isn't to appeal to the major defense contractors' patriotism, it's to qualify a competitor. The presence of qualified alternative producers waiting in the wings with government-owned designs and certified processes is the only path to scalable production. Lockheed proudly reminds us it never forgets who it's working for. Its earnings reports suggest it remembers its shareholders rather better. That isn't a moral failing. It's what firms in uncompetitive markets do. Give them competition and they'll compete. That's the free market. Mr. Devine is an assistant professor of economics at Boston College. He was a fellow at the White House National Economic Council 2023 to 24. Mr. Slocum was an economist at the Council of Economic Advisors 2023 to 2024. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Why would anyone trust Pakistan to mediate with Iran? We learned in the 2000 that Islamabad's interests are in many ways the direct opposite of America's. By Sadhana Dumay. As the U.S. war with Iran drags on, skeptics have begun to question the role of the principal mediator, Pakistan. Is the nuclear-armed Islamic Republic the most reliable interlocutor for such high-stakes negotiations? Pakistan has attributes that make it a useful intermediary, but America shouldn't forget that when it comes to Iran, Pakistan's interests aren't the same as those of the U.S. On the face of it, Pakistan might seem like an odd choice for a mediator. During the war in Afghanistan, Pakistan was widely castigated for playing a double game, accepting U.S. aid to fight terrorism, while at the same time secretly aiding and abetting the Afghan Taliban. Pakistani forbearance extended to al-Qaeda. In 2011, the U.S. discovered that Osama bin Laden was hiding in a fortified compound less than a mile from Pakistan's premier military academy. President Trump, in 2018, summed up in a tweet a view common in Washington. The United States has foolishly given Pakistan more than $33 billion in aid over the last 15 years, and they've given us nothing but lies and deceit, thinking of our leaders as fools. In his second term, Mr. Trump has developed a strange love affair with Pakistan, fueled apparently by flattery, counter-terrorism cooperation, and an agreement with a cryptocurrency firm linked to Mr. Trump's inner circle. The president has called Pakistan's de facto military ruler Asim Munir his favorite field marshal. Since the war with Iran began nearly 3 months ago, Pakistan has hosted U.S.-Iran peace talks and emerged as the conflict's most important mediator. Its strengths include geographical proximity to Iran, ties with both U.S. and China, and a defense pact with Saudi Arabia. Unlike many developing countries, Pakistan boasts a competent diplomatic corps staffed by officers fluent in English. Paradoxically, Pakistan's fragile economy and restive society may make it more attractive as a mediator. The U.S. knows that Pakistan needs Washington's backing at the International Monetary Fund to keep its economy afloat. The Iranians know Pakistan fears angering its people, who are mostly sympathetic to Iran, in particular, a large Shiite Muslim minority that accounts for up to 20% of Pakistan's population. The wealthy Gulf countries know Pakistan relies on them for remittances and low-interest loans. Nonetheless, not everyone thinks Pakistan's involvement in mediation is a good idea. In a Substack post, Danielle Pluntka of the American Enterprise Institute describes the choice of Pakistan as the main U.S. mediator as a self-inflicted blunder, an own goal by the Trump administration. She adds that Pakistan is clearly on Team Iran. CBS News last week reported that multiple Iranian aircraft were parked on a Pakistani airfield, including an Iranian Air Force RC-130, a reconnaissance and intelligence gathering aircraft. The implication is that Pakistan might have been shielding valuable Iranian air assets from possible strikes by the U.S. and Israel. In a statement responding to the CBS News report, the Pakistani Foreign Ministry denied this. The Iranian aircraft currently parked in Pakistan arrived during the ceasefire period and bear no linkage whatsoever to any military contingency or preservation arrangement. But for U.S. lawmakers, the arrangement raises red flags. I don't trust Pakistan as far as I can throw them, Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, said at a Senate hearing. If they actually do have Iranian aircraft parked in Pakistan bases to protect Iranian military assets, that tells me we should be looking maybe for somebody else to mediate. Considering America's experience with Pakistan and Afghanistan, no one should be surprised that Islamabad doesn't exactly evoke trust in Washington. In a phone interview, Kenneth Pollack, an expert on Iran's nuclear program at the Middle East Institute, underscores two more reasons to approach Islamabad with caution. First, Pakistan's closeness with China, which provides Islamabad with diplomatic backing and about 80% of its weapons imports, raises questions about its motivations. It's unlikely that Pakistan would have inserted itself into the peace process without a green light from Beijing. The Chinese would very much like to see us humiliated in Iran, Mr. Pollack says. Second, Pakistan's development of nuclear weapons outside the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the role of Pakistani scientist Abu Qadir Khan's nuclear smuggling network in helping Iran's nuclear program in the 1980s and 1990s highlights how Islamabad diverges from Washington on non-proliferation. Their approach to nuclear weapons is fundamentally different from our approach, says Mr. Pollack. If the U.S. and Israel permanently denuclearize Iran, it would set an uncomfortable precedent for Pakistan by establishing a norm that nations that back jihadist groups aren't allowed to own nuclear weapons. What then is the way forward? The U.S. could add a more traditional mediator such as Switzerland to the mix. This would reduce the risk of Pakistan's attempting to shape the outcome of negotiations to benefit itself or China. It would also give Pakistan an incentive to transmit communications from the U.S. and Iran without putting a spin of its own. This goes beyond Reagan's trust but verify, Mr. Pollack says. Our policy should be distrust and verify. Now for the credit rates last week compared to now. A money market annual yield remains 0.42%, as a 5-year CD continues 1.70%. A 30-year mortgage was 6.44%, now 6.54%. A 15-year mortgage fixed was 5.87%, now 6.13%. A jumbo mortgage was 6.55%, now 6.60%. A 5-year adjustable mortgage was 5.99%, now 6%. A new car loan, 48 months, was 6.95%, now 6.96%. In honor of Memorial Day, In Flanders Fields by John McCrae. In Flanders fields the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. The reference of red poppies that grew over the graves of the fallen soldiers resulted in the remembrance poppy becoming one of the world's most recognized memorial symbols for soldiers who have died in conflict. On this coming Memorial Day, remember all those who have served and are serving our countries, especially those who have made the ultimate sacrifice for the freedoms we all enjoy today. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the May 21st, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening.